All right, people, I am back again. And this time I'm going to talk about a different elephant in the room, and this is going to be the Federal Reserve. You know, our banking system that's here in America. I know this is going to be an exciting topic, as it is just as much as it was for me when I researched this information. But I think it's very important that all of us know who and what is controlling our monetary system here in America, as well as the rest of the world, it seems. So anyway, I'm going to talk about the Federal Reserve Corporation. First of all, it is not a government agency. It's actually a private corporation, which I didn't know about. I mean, we don't know what we don't know, you know. Whoever talks about such a thing. So I'm going to tell you how it came into being and how it actually functions for the most part. I'm not going to get into that deep detail. But the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913, which officially took the power to create the money to run the United States away from Congress, and it gave it over to private bankers who call themselves the Federal Reserve, or the Feds. But note, they're private bankers. They're private. I mean, they're separate bankers that have bonds and stocks and all that wonderful stuff. They failed to tell us that part. The first thing that must be understood is that the Federal Reserve Corporation is not a government agency, as most people think. It's a private corporation controlled by bankers. That doesn't seem like that should be done that way, I didn't think. When our founding fathers wrote the Constitution of the United States back in the 1700s, they specifically stated in Article 1, Section 8, that Congress and only Congress shall have the power to coin or create money and regulate the value thereof. However, since the passage of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, and it was signed by President Woodrow Wilson, the Fed prints and issues money through the Treasury, and it regulates its value. Okay, so it's almost kind of like a corporation, kind of like I don't know if you watched my video last week or 2 weeks ago when I was talking about, you know, an entity here and then a foundation there, and they kind of work with each other. So that's kind of what it seemed like to me. I could be wrong. The Federal Reserve Act authorized the establishment of Federal Reserve Corporation with a board of directors, the Federal Reserve Board, to run it. So then the United States was divided into 12 districts. Now, the new law completely removed from Congress the right to create money or have control over its creation and gave this function over to the Federal Reserve Corporation, which is illegal under the Constitution. But it was done anyway, and it was passed by Congress and signed into act. But I want to do the backstory of how this act even became into being, or who even created the act to begin with, because that's actually almost just as important as the act itself. So back in 1910, I don't know if y'all have ever heard of Jekyll Island, which the creature from Jekyll Island, which is I always thought about, you know, some monstrous dinosaur or something like that, which now, metaphorically speaking, that's kind of what it sounds like, because this is where, back in 1910, this is where 7 of the wealthiest men gathered at Jekyll Island. It was a private island. It was a private retreat, and it was owned by very, very wealthy people. And they decided to meet there, and it was actually in secret. It came out later that they had met, but they had met there to discuss this, and I'm going to actually talk to you about that. And it was considered the Jekyll Island Club, is what it was called. And a lot of these families that owned it was like J.P. Morgan, William Rockefeller, and their associates. They owned the island. It's where their families used to go and spend the winter months. And the location was where the Federal Reserve was created, 3 years before the Federal Reserve Act was passed into law. Now I'm going to talk to y'all and tell y'all the people that actually attended the meeting and that was there and what they represented at the time and what they actually did for a living, because it's almost like the further down you start studying this stuff, it's almost like I just don't understand how something like this could be created. I know it's been over 100 years ago, so we don't know what we don't know, you know, and we just follow laws and regulations because it's what's the right thing to do. I mean, and we all do these kind of things. But once you start finding out who's really running the show, it's kind of like, it almost seems like a Ponzi scheme. I hate to even say that, but that's almost what it seems like to me. So I'm going to tell you the 7 men that were actually at this meeting, and I'm going to kind of give you a little rundown of each of these men. Now, this was back in 1910, so this was quite a while ago. So the first one was Senator Nelson Aldrich. He was a Republican whip in the Senate. He was the chairman of the National Monetary Commission, which was the special committee of Congress that was created for the purpose of making recommendations to Congress for proposed legislation to reform banking. Senator Nelson Aldrich was a very important business associate of J.P. Morgan. He was the father-in-law of John D. Rockefeller Jr. and became the grandfather of Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, who also became a vice president. The second person was Abraham Andrew, and he was also a very important person who was an assistant secretary of the Treasury. He later became a congressman and was very important in banking circles. The third one was Frank Vanderlip. He was the president of the National City Bank of New York, which was the largest of all of the banks in America, representing the financial interest of William Rockefeller and the international investment firm Kahn, Loeb and Company. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm trying the best that I can. Okay, the next one was called Henry Davison. He was a senior partner of the J.P. Morgan Company. The fifth one was Charles Norton. He was the president of the First National Bank of New York, which was another one of the giants in America. The sixth one was Benjamin Strong. He was the head of J.P. Morgan Bankers Trust Company, and 3 short years later, Benjamin Strong would become the first head of the Federal Reserve System. The seventh one, and probably the most important, was Paul Warburg. Paul Warburg was probably the most important of the meeting because of his knowledge of banking, as it was practiced in Europe. He was a partner of Kahn, Loeb and Company and was a representative of the Rothschilds banking dynasty in England and in France. Paul Warburg was one of the wealthiest men in the world. Now, as amazing as this may be, the 7 men that met at Jekyll Island in 1910 represented about a fourth of the world's entire wealth. So, I mean, these 7 men were so powerful and held so much wealth, but yet they met in secret to form a Federal Reserve System. And it was 3 years before it was actually put into Congress. So we just saw all the connections of all these conglomerate people and how they were able to form this act. And this is what was put in front of Congress that was passed in 1913, and that is how our bank was actually created. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the bank. It just seems kind of like, and I didn't know for years either, that the bank was actually private. I mean, when you think of the Federal Reserve, you just think of the Federal Reserve. That's who makes the money, and that's who prints the money, and that's who is in charge of inflation, and that's who... You know, I sometimes wonder, I'm like, who's in charge of making this money? I mean, we always know, well, it's the feds. Well, who is the Fed? You know, so now I'm telling you that it's not a government agency. It works with government, but it's not a government agency. It is actually a private entity of its own. So it's like, who actually is in charge of seeing that, you know? And they have 12 banks. The Federal Reserve is a central bank, and then they have 12 banks. And they're actually private bankers. And that's who's in charge of our monies. And, you know, and I think I've heard, too, the Federal Reserve itself has been audited, but the 12 banks below them have never been audited in over 100 years, or since they've come into play. So, I don't understand, you know, and then I kind of read a little bit more about how the monies were made, and I think the Federal Reserve, you know, with all the banks that they use underneath it, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that they only have, each bank that uses money or that lends money, they only have to have like a 10%, they only have to hold a 10% reserve of whatever it is they lend out. So say like, for instance, if I were to deposit $100 in the bank, then they would actually take that $100, and off of my $100, they're allowed to actually lend out $900. Because the $100 is still going to be kept in the bank. So it's almost like they create money out of thin air. I mean, it's just like, It really doesn't make sense. Now, I'll admit, I hate math. I mean, I've always hated math. I still hate math to this day. And that may not have even made sense what I just said about the 10% and the $100. But it's, you kind of know what I'm talking about. So it's like they can lend money off money that's not even there. So I were to bet if all of us were to go to the bank right now, every one of us, and try to cash out our money, it wouldn't be there. They don't have our money because it's all lent out, so it's just fiat. And the money too, then this is another thing too that I found out before I even did this video, is that our currency is not backed by anything. It's fiat. It's just as worthless as monopoly money. I mean, it used to be backed by gold and silver, but that was removed. I mean, so now they're just printing money out of thin air. It has no value. It's worthless. It's not worth anything. And it just amazes me when I find this. Actually, it's hit a gut punch because I still feel nauseous even talking about it. Because we have all this money in stock market, and these stock markets and the federal bank or corporation, the people that sit on the board are the same people that sit on the stock market board, are the same people. I mean, it's just like, it's incredibly the biggest flipping global spider web I believe I've ever seen in my life. And that's just a couple of things that I'm starting to read about. And trust me, I was just an average kid in school. I mean, I just barely passed by the skin of my teeth. I mean, I went to pep rallies and football games just to pass history. I hated it. I mean, I was just there just to socialize, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, but I've become more and more aware of things, and when things don't make sense, you've got to start asking yourself why. Why do they not make sense? And we have so much access to information, we can figure out a lot of this stuff ourselves out. And that's what I'm trying to do. Now, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation, and then other stuff is right out there, and it's just like, the thing about it is just like the Federal Reserve. I mean, if they don't have to tell you that it's a private banking industry, because it's like, it's out there to find out. If you can't figure it out, that's on you. That's not them. So I'm saying, well, I need to start paying more attention to all this stuff, because we are living in squirrely times right now. And I'm trying to get to the bottom of who is pulling those levers, because we're all working our tails off here trying to survive. And we get one curveball after another. And I don't think it's going to get any easier. I think that shit is fixing to hit the fan. Because to me, Federal Reserve and all this money and all these trillions of dollars in debt that we are in right now, I mean, it just keeps coming and coming and coming. It's just like a house of cards. It is going to collapse. And I think the stock market is going to crash. I don't know when, and maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, because I've got money in there too. But it's just like, those who control the money control the world. Well, I mean, I don't know. I just think that it's just craziness. And maybe I've just jumped too far down into that damn rabbit hole. Now I'm just reading all this other stuff. But it's like, I mean, stuff's just not making sense. So I'm trying to make sense of it. And then when I'm starting to connect the dots, it's like, well, that's just crazy. So anyway, I thought that y'all might enjoy this information about the Federal Reserve. And I'm sorry if I made any mistakes, because I am not going to hit and try to edit this stuff, because I don't even know what I'm doing half the time. So anyhow, y'all can find all this information out. This was just what my thoughts are after I've read and researched some of this stuff. So I hope that will interest y'all I know it's a boring subject. It's so boring. I'm just about to fall asleep reading all this stuff, but I'm still doing it. I'm going to present it to y'all. I'm going to find out more information. Might as well throw y'all some damn hard curveballs, since life itself is not hard enough right now. So I'm going to do some more, and I wish y'all well. And with 9/11 coming up, it's going to be a hard weekend. I pray that everybody will stay safe. I hope nothing horrible happens, but always be prepared. Just always be prepared for what comes your way. And I will see y'all soon. I'll talk to you later. Bye.